In the mid-1970s, one name would come to haunt America like no other: Ted Bundy. Charming, intelligent, and seemingly normal, Bundy led a double life that no one saw coming. In this video, we will explore his dark path, his horrifying crimes, and the psyche of one of history's most notorious serial killers. Stay tuned to uncover the real story behind Ted Bundy and the mystery that eluded justice for so long. How did a seemingly perfect young man become one of America's most terrifying killers? The truth might be more chilling than you ever imagined. Ted Bundy's story begins in Burlington, Vermont, where he was born to a young woman named Louise Carole. The circumstances of his birth were surrounded by confusion, with Ted's mother believing that his father was a sailor who never returned after he left her. However, Ted later discovered the truth, that his biological father was not the sailor, but a man who abandoned him and his mother shortly after his birth. Ted's early life was one of secrecy and abandonment. Raised by his mother, he was told his grandparents were his real parents, and his mother his older sister. This complex web of lies and deception would lay the foundation for Bundy's troubled relationship with truth and identity. Bundy's behavior began to show signs of distress in his early years. He had a fascination with violence and cruelty, a trait that would follow him throughout his life. It wasn't until he was in his teenage years that the cracks in his facade began to appear. At first glance, Ted Bundy seemed like an ideal young man. Intelligent, ambitious, well-liked. He was popular among his peers, held leadership positions in student organizations, and even dated several women throughout his college years. But beneath this seemingly charming exterior, darkness lurked. Ted's college years were a period of conflicting behaviors. While he participated in extracurricular activities, showed a keen interest in psychology, and maintained a high GPA, his peers noticed a certain aloofness about him, an inability to form genuine emotional connections. Bundy's relationships with women were particularly troubling. He often dated women who met a very specific physical criteria: tall, blonde, attractive. This obsession would become a recurring theme in his crimes. Those who knew Bundy described him as polite, charismatic, and kind, but there were occasional glimpses of his darker side. He would often become frustrated or agitated, especially in situations where he couldn't maintain control over the conversation or his environment. One former girlfriend recalls a date where Bundy grew increasingly agitated after she tried to break up with him. He became angry and withdrawn, almost as though he couldn't tolerate rejection. This intensity began to surface in Bundy's interactions, and it planted the seeds for his violent tendencies later on. As Bundy perfected the art of deception, his inner demons began to emerge. How long could he keep up the facade of the perfect, young man before it all came crashing down? And what would it take to push him over the edge? In August 1975, Bundy's life would change when he was finally apprehended in Utah during a routine traffic stop. At the time, police had no idea they were arresting one of the country's most notorious killers. However, Bundy's story didn't end there. After being charged with kidnapping and assaulting a woman, Bundy was held in custody, but his criminal activities were far from over. In 1977, Bundy managed to escape from a Colorado jail, disappearing for several days before being recaptured. He was eventually placed in a high-security facility, but his story would take another chilling turn. But escaping prison twice wasn't enough for Bundy. His second escape from a Florida prison marked the final chapter in his reign of terror. How did he manage to do it? And what was his plan for his final escape? After his audacious second escape from custody, Bundy was arrested in Florida in February 1978. The charges against him were grave. Two sorority sisters, Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman, had been brutally murdered at the Chi Omega House at Florida State University. It was these crimes that finally brought Bundy to face the full force of the law. Ted Bundy's trial was unlike anything the American justice system had ever seen. For the first time, cameras were allowed inside the courtroom, broadcasting the proceedings into homes across the country. The result was a media frenzy that turned the trial into must-watch television. Bundy's charm and charisma captivated the public, creating an unsettling juxtaposition to the heinous crimes he was accused of committing. For many, it was incomprehensible that someone so composed and articulate could also be a cold-blooded killer. Perhaps the most bizarre element of the trial was Bundy's decision to represent himself. Armed with a background in law and a dangerously inflated ego, Bundy believed no one could defend him better than he could. Bundy used his legal knowledge to cross-examine witnesses, challenge evidence, and attempt to undermine the prosecution's case. His demeanor in court was confident, even smug, as he played the dual roles of defendant and lawyer. But while Bundy's intelligence was undeniable, his arrogance often got the better of him. At times, his questioning seemed more like a performance than a legal strategy, a performance aimed at manipulating the jury and the public. Despite Bundy's courtroom theatrics, the evidence against him was overwhelming. The prosecution presented a groundbreaking piece of forensic evidence, bite marks on one of the victims that perfectly matched Bundy's dental impressions. It was the first time such evidence was used in a major trial, setting a new precedent in criminal law. In addition to the forensic evidence, eyewitness testimonies placed Bundy near multiple crime scenes. His distinctive Volkswagen Beetle, a crucial clue in earlier investigations, further tied him to the murders. After 6 weeks of gripping testimony, the jury took less than 7 hours to deliberate. Ted Bundy was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. For many, it was the moment they had been waiting for, a measure of justice for the lives lost. Bundy reacted with a chilling indifference, smirking as he was escorted out. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to show. The trial was over, but the battle for Bundy's life, and his legacy, was just beginning. Ted Bundy had finally been convicted, but the story didn't end there. Behind bars, Bundy launched a desperate fight to delay his execution. His charm and cunning would once again come into play, but this time, the stakes were even higher. Would he outwit the system once more, or was his time finally up? In the years following his conviction, Bundy was held on death row at Florida State Prison. The media circus that had followed him through his trial now gave way to silence. For Bundy, however, the years of isolation were anything but peaceful. Behind bars, Bundy was far from contrite. Despite his conviction, he continued to proclaim his innocence for years, even as mounting evidence and confessions began to pile up. But there was one thing that began to gnaw at him: his impending execution. As the years wore on, Bundy's psychological state began to unravel. In his final days on death row, Bundy finally admitted to the full scope of his crimes. He began to detail his murders, giving chilling accounts of how he stalked, captured, and killed his victims. In a series of interviews, Bundy revealed more about his crimes than anyone could have imagined. He described his methodical planning, how he used his good looks and charm to lure young women, and the chilling way he escalated in violence. Bundy admitted that the thrill of the kill was the ultimate driving force behind his actions. But as his confessions grew more detailed, so did the realization that Bundy had never really expressed any remorse. His words were those of a man seeking control even in his final moments, a man still trying to shape the narrative of his life. January 24, 1989, the day Ted Bundy's fate would be sealed. After years of delays, appeals, and legal wrangling, the authorities were determined that Bundy would face the consequences for his actions. It would be the end of a dark chapter in America's criminal history. As the execution date drew near, Bundy seemed eerily calm. Gone was the arrogant manipulator, replaced by a man who knew that his life was finally over. But his final moments would leave one last mark on the world. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed by electric chair at Florida State Prison. His execution marked the end of a saga that had captivated the nation for over a decade. But for many, it was a long-awaited moment of justice. Bundy's execution was a somber affair. Outside the prison, a crowd gathered, some celebrating the death of one of the most notorious killers in history, others reflecting on the toll his actions had taken on society. Inside, Bundy's life ended with an eerie calm, his final moments a contrast to the violence he had unleashed on so many. Ted Bundy's death did not end the public's fascination with him. In the decades that followed, his story continued to captivate, leading to countless books, documentaries, and films. His crimes became the subject of intense media analysis, and he became one of the most well-known serial killers in history. But Bundy's legacy isn't just one of grisly crime and infamy. It serves as a grim reminder of how charisma and charm can mask the darkest intentions. His case sparked a national conversation about how society views violence, the psychology of serial killers, and the disturbing allure of true crime. As the years passed, Bundy's case became more than just a horrific chapter in criminal history. It became a part of the cultural landscape, influencing how we view not only criminals but also the media's role in sensationalizing crime. But amid the media frenzy, the true tragedy of Bundy's legacy lies in the lives he took. For the victims' families, there was no closure. No amount of media attention or sensationalism could replace the loved ones they lost. The victims were real people, individuals with dreams, families, and futures stolen from them. For their families, no justice, no execution, or media coverage could erase the pain Bundy caused. Their grief lives on, a reminder of the human cost of Bundy's reign of terror. And while Bundy's death may have closed one chapter, his legacy endures, not in the shadows of fear he once cast, but in the ongoing fight for justice for those he left behind. In their hearts, the memory of their loved ones will always live on, long after the headlines fade. Ted Bundy may have died, but his story continues to shape how we understand evil, obsession, and the darkness within. His name will forever be etched in history, but in the end, it's the victims, the families, and the lessons learned from his reign of terror that will define his true legacy.
Thanks for watching. For more interesting videos, please subscribe.